Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. It's not our nicest weather, but thanks. I have something I'm supposed to read. Welcome to the Minnesota Zoo and the Our World Speaker Series. We are happy to have you join us tonight. My name is, it's a big blank there. My name is Kevin Willis. I am the Vice President of Biological Programs here at the Minnesota Zoo. I find that rather pretentious, so I just say I'm the head of the animal department. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, which provides funding to make this event free for all for you to attend. To allow wider access for the presentation, we offer live captioning with an emphasis on live. Our captioner is typing as I speak. I should enunciate, having no idea what I'm going to say next. So we ask in advance for understanding when words may not be correct. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Dr. William Robichaud. Just a quick comment. When Sir Isaac Newton published his Principia Mathematica, a lot of people back then thought science was done, right? He discovered it all. We can move on and do other things. I would have said, as a college student, as a graduate student, which was a while ago, that all the big mammals had already been discovered. There was really no reason to go. This is so exciting to a biology nerd like myself, and I hope most of you. I'll read the rest. Dr. Robichaud is the founding coordinator of the Saola working group. He has worked on conservation of wildlife in protected areas in Southeast Asia, mostly in Laos, since the early 1990s. In recognition of his work there, in 2015, the IUCN Species Survival Commission awarded him the Harry Mezel Award for Conservation Leadership. And I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Kevin quoted from Isaac Newton. I'm going to quote from Garrison Keillor. The first line of one of his books, I can't remember which one was, it was the sort of bitterly cold winter day that the Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce tries to pretend doesn't exist. So thank you for coming out on one of those days that the Twin Cities Chamber of Commerce is concerned about. Yeah, and we're going to go to the tropics tonight. How does that work for everybody? And Kevin's right, we're going to explore just an extraordinary story tonight. And it's just, for me, reassuring and wonderful that there are still remarkable mysteries in the world. And I think there always will be. And this is what I believe we're going to explore, one example of this tonight. The animal I'm going to talk about is called the Saola. And just understand there's no such thing as a dumb question about Saola. I don't think there are any dumb questions about anything. But at any time during the talk, I mean, I'll take questions at the end, but if any time during the talk, if there's anything you want me to elaborate on, or something you didn't understand, please feel free to raise your hand. We're all in together, warm and cozy, and we can make this more of a conversation than a presentation, if that works for you. Let's see, where is this? So the area of the world that we're going to visit tonight is Indochina, specifically the countries of Laos and Vietnam. And within Laos and Vietnam, one particular area, which are the Annamite Mountains. This is a mountain range that runs along the border of the two countries. It actually, the ridge of the Annamite Mountains forms the border between Laos and Vietnam. And this is an extraordinary area. It's recognized now as one of the world's global biodiversity hotspots. And down in these forests and these canopies, I think there are still mysteries yet to be uncovered and new things to be found. But I'll just take your walkthrough of some of the things that we already know about from the Annamite Mountains. These are species that are found nowhere else in the world except this mountain range along the border. Beautiful Duke Langer, recognized as one of the world's most beautiful monkeys. This is the white-cheeked gibbon. Two of the greatest calls in nature, I think, are loons from the northern lakes of Wisconsin and Minnesota. I'm from Wisconsin. I drove up from my farmhouse about 45 minutes west of Madison today. The other one is the call of these white-cheeked gibbons in the morning in the forest. Kind of imagine like two very, very large loons up in a canopy calling in a duet at dawn. It gives you an idea of what gibbons sound like. This is the Francoise's langur. There are several species of this type of monkey, again only found in the Annamite Mountains. This is a very large pheasant, crested argus. This is probably the third most spectacular call in nature. In fact, the Lao word for this animal, and I apologize for Lisa doing the captioning, but it's they call it nok wow, is actually what the call sounds like and is the name of the animal. The tail in the male, like you see here, is the longest feather of any bird in the world. Again, only found in the Annamite Mountains. These species have been known for a long time, but just since the 1990s, biologists, we started finding some new things in the Annamites. This beautiful rabbit called the Annamite striped rabbit, the local Lao word for it means tiger striped rabbit. This was just discovered in the mid-1990s by my friend and colleague Robert Timmons. This new species of barking deer, or muntjac. This other new species of muntjac called large antlered muntjac. All of these have been found since the 1990s, and all of them are found only in the Annamite Mountains. And some really bizarre things, like this, this is called bare-faced bulbul. It's a bald songbird. It's the only bald songbird known from Southeast Asia, and we don't know why it's bald. It'd be a nice master's study for some student to go figure out why are these things bald. When my friend Rob Timmons, he was the one who first discovered it and saw these, it was at the end of a long day of surveys, and he was close to suffering from heat stroke, and he thought he was hallucinating. Because this flock of bulbuls, there were several species, landed in a tree, and they all looked bald. And he discounted it. He said, this can't be right, I've got heat stroke. And it was years later before it was actually confirmed as a new species. But the discovery that really brought attention to the Annamite Mountains came in 1992 in a small nature reserve in Vietnam, Vu Quang, on the border with Laos. That year, a team of biologists, a guy from WWF with some biologists from the Department of Forestry in Hanoi, some Vietnamese biologists, they went to do a general biodiversity and wildlife survey of this small protected area in the Annamite Mountains. And one day, one of the Vietnamese member of the team, he hiked into a nearby village to try to buy some fresh vegetables for their field camp. And while in the village, he noticed these long, spectacular horns nailed to the wall of a hunter, the house of a hunter in the village, unlike anything known from Southeast Asia. At first, they didn't know what to make of this. Laos and Vietnam was a French Indochina colony for 100 years. At first, they thought maybe some French guy brought something back from Africa, and they got traded up into the mountains of Vietnam. But no, they found several sets of these horns, and some of them still had very fresh flesh on them. And they actually got a whole skin, and they realized they not only discovered a new species of animal the size of a white-tailed deer, but an entirely new genus. And they, to the shock of the world, they published this description in the Journal of Nature, announcing to the world the discovery of a new genus of large mammal. This just blew the minds of biologists around the world. I mean, nobody believed that an animal both this large and this distinctive could go undetected until the closing years of the 20th century. They called it, the genus name is Pseudo-oryx, because it superficially looks like the oryxes of North Africa and the Middle East. It's actually not related to them at all. It's actually a very primitive member of the cattle family. But as you can see, it doesn't look like any cow or bison, that we know. Basically, there's only one species of Sawa in the world, and it's the Saola. This is a Saola. This is the biologist George Schaller in Laos doing surveys. In the villages up in the mountains in the animals' range, they use these small little spinning wheels, and in the Lao language, small spinning wheel is la, and the word sao means any kind of a leg or a post, like the leg of a chair or a table is a sao. So these are the sao la. And villagers say they call it that because it's the same size and shape as the animal's horns. So basically the animal's name means old spinning wheel posts, or old spinning wheel arms. We still don't know very much about Saola. This is only one of a handful of camera trap photographs. It took 6 years after its discovery to get the first wild camera trap photograph of the animal. It's very elusive, it's very low density. We have fewer than 8 camera trap photographs of it in the last 25 years. The most recent one was in 2013 in Vietnam. There's the Sawa, and you can see the long horns there. This was taken by a WWF project in Vietnam. It's by far the largest land animal of certain existence that's never been seen in the wild by a biologist. And this is what has earned its name, the Asian unicorn. We know it's out there. I mean, we still see dead ones. We have very specific information from villagers. Villagers see it, but no biologist has yet seen this animal in the wild. And I just think it's wonderful that we still live in a world where that can be true. I was very fortunate to see a Saola, but a captive, this adult female. A few years after it was discovered, I was working as the country coordinator in Laos for the Wildlife Conservation Society of the Bronx Zoo. At that time, down in central Laos, there were 2 provinces in the Annamite Mountains that were basically in the control of a general, a guy named General Chang. And he had a small menagerie in his little compound where his base of operations were. And because he was very interested in wildlife. In fact, we discovered one of those new species of deer at his little zoo one day. And when he realized that this spectacular new animal, the Saola, was found in that area, he put out a reward to villagers. He offered to pay any village $1,000 that could catch a Saola for him. And at that time, that was an extraordinary amount of money for people in rural Laos. And some Hmong villagers, in fact, succeeded, and they caught this female. And General Chang sent one of his helicopters up to their village and picked it up. By just a combination of very fortunate circumstances, I learned about it within 24 hours and was down there the next day. And just started watching her around the clock. This still is the only adult Saola that's ever been seen by the outside world. And she was an amazing animal. One of the most remarkable things about her is she was completely tame around people. 3 days caught out of the wild, 1 or 2 days in General Chang's menagerie. I was measuring her with a tape measure, and I was just, doing this. And she was tamer than a village goat or a cow, because you can't just go up and, touch a goat or a cow. And there is a thing called post-capture stress, that animals, have very bizarre behavior due to stress. But I've talked to a lot of people who keep hoof stock in zoos and describe their behavior, and they say, no, this doesn't sound like that. Because she groomed herself, she fed, she watered, she was very afraid of dogs. She had a very strong reaction to dogs. People she paid no attention to. And Lao villagers and local townspeople were coming, to look at her in the menagerie, and I talked to some of them, and I said, in fact, a Buddhist monk from the temple came, and he was looking at the Sawa, and I was talking to him. I said, why? She's completely tame around people. And he said, yes, we have a nickname for Saola, and he gave the Lao words, which mean the polite animal. I said, why do you call it that? He said, well, Saola just always walks slowly and quietly through the forest and never gets upset at anything. And then another day, a Hmong hunter from a local Hmong village came and was looking at the Saola and me, and I said, yeah, she's completely tame around people. And the Hmong are fantastic naturalists, and they know Saola very well. He said, yeah, the only thing Saola is afraid of is dogs. So, because there's an Asiatic wild dog, the dhole, D-H-O-L-E, and Saola co-evolved with dhole, so they have a very strong reaction to the scent or the sight of any kind of a dog. General Chang's staff had responsibility for her, were taking care of her. Unfortunately, none of them were professional hoofstock keepers, and she died after about 3 weeks. With double the sadness, the Hmong who had caught her said she was pregnant, and sure enough, we found a beautiful male fetus. She was carrying a little male Saola when she died. So, and she died this was the next morning after his staff took her out of the pen. I watched her kind of lay down and breathe her last at dusk on a cold Friday evening, and it felt like Good Friday. So most of what we know about Saola has come from talking to local people. And in the Annamite Mountains, the cultural diversity is also extraordinary. I have an anthropologist friend, a linguist, who works in Laos and Thailand, and he called the Annamite Mountains an area of cultural and linguistic megadiversity. In one protected area where I work, there are about 12 different languages spoken. And yes, you get that like in Papua New Guinea, but these are 4 different major language families, I mean, completely mutually unintelligible. So the Annamite Mountains have just, because they're very steep and lots of valleys, isolated, there's just been this incredible flowering of both human and biological diversity. So what we know from talking to local people and the bit of information we can piece together is Saola is a dense forest species. It likes a particular type of forest that gets a little bit of rain throughout the year. It doesn't have a dry season like most of the rest of the Laos. It's solitary. As we know, it's very wary. It browses on leaves. It's a browser rather than a grazer. And this is its approximate range in the Annamite Mountains. So it's now isolated in several different subpopulations. It may now be the most endangered large mammal, terrestrial large mammal in the world. There are none in captivity, and the best guess we have by piecing together information from the local people and how often we camera trap it, it's probably down to fewer than 100. There might be 100 out there. As I talk to you today, there might be 10, there might be 20. And we know they're still out there because we've got some very recent information from local people. And it's, it's a combination of, it's far closer to extinction than other animals that have gotten a lot more attention and resources for conservation, which they should do, like, giant panda and tigers and all of that. But none of these animals are as remotely threatened with extinction as Saola. Saola has just sort of fallen under the radar of conservation awareness. The IUCN Red List, they keep a list of, they rank the threat categories of species throughout the world, and the last stop before extinction is critically endangered, which is what Sawa is assessed at. So why is it so threatened? There are possibly 2 answers to this question, historical and one current. This is a US B-52 unloading its load of 2,000-pound bombs over the Ho Chi Minh Trail of Laos in the 1960s and 70s. The Ho Chi Minh Trail ran right through the Annamite Mountains along the border of Laos and Vietnam. This is a photograph I took just a few years ago in Laos. This isn't a golf course and sand traps. These are still the bomb craters that are still in Laos. Laos has the unhappy distinction of being the most bombed country in human history. At the time of the Vietnam War, Laos is about the size of the same area as the state of Oregon. At the time of the Vietnam War, there were about 3 million people in Laos, and we dropped more bombs on Laos than were dropped on all countries of Europe during World War II. And these effects are still going on. Still today, a few Lao every month hit an unexploded bomb while trying to hoe their rice field or something, and a few people every month are still killed and maimed by the unexploded ordnance. So this is actually a map supplied by the US government. Every tiny little red dot is one bombing mission over Laos during the 8 years of the bombing campaign. And what I've noticed, if you match this map up against the Saolas range, you notice that where the bombing was most intensive in the Ho Chi Minh Trail, like see this little spur up here? There's a gap in the Saolas range. I don't know for sure that this is causative and not just coincidence, but it's certainly quite likely. And remember, it wasn't just the bombing, it was all the Agent Orange defoliants were being sprayed. And you can go on YouTube and you can see kind of film of these bomb loads exploding in the forests of the Annamite Mountains under a B-52. This, without doubt, killed thousands or hundreds of tigers, Asian elephants, and Saolas. And we don't know if these populations have ever fully recovered from this. We can't be sure, but I think it's a pretty good guess. But we do know that today, Sawa is still much rarer than when it was discovered only in 1992. So something else is going on than just this. And it's not habitat loss, it's not local people killing Sawa for food, it's organized, intensive commercial poaching for the wildlife trade. There is a lot more forest left in the Annamite than are animals in it today, including Sawa. So these are wire snares made out of like bicycle brake cable or bicycle gear cable. And I was out with these village rangers in Laos, and these are about 200 snares we collected from one snare line set. You know, it went about a half a mile through the forest. And this is just catastrophic. I mean, the amount of snaring that is going on in the forests of Laos and Vietnam today. This is a Sawa that was adult male, was found in a snare in Laos in 2010. The Sawa working group we worked with, we heard about it. The villagers, because of the conservation awareness we've been doing about Sawa, normally they find an animal in their snare and they would just kill it and eat it. They didn't kill it. They actually made like a little fence for it in the forest near the village, and they released it from the snare. They notified the authorities and the government a couple days walk away. We sent a team of government guys back with just instructions to measure the animal and let it go. And they arrived at nightfall, took these photographs. The next morning the animal was dead, didn't survive. I went back and I talked to the hunters who caught it, and they estimated it had already been in the snare for 3 days and they found it. So 3 days of stress and without water and food. I mean, the best vet at the Minnesota Zoo probably couldn't have saved this animal. This is one of those new species of muntjac, the large antlered muntjac. We found dead in a snare, and you can see it's caught by its forefoot. And there's a lot of waste. I mean, the animal hung in the snare for days until it died of stress and thirst. Because a lot of the poaching pressure in Laos is coming across the border from Vietnam. The population of Vietnam is almost 100 million. The population of Laos is only like 6 or 7 million. And Vietnam is well connected to the markets in China for the trade demand. So just by osmosis, a lot of the poachers are coming in Vietnam on trails into Laos. And they come in and, you know, a team of 4 or 5 guys, they'll set thousands of these snares in a week for a few days. Then they go back to Vietnam, and they come back once every month or two to check the snare lines. So there's a lot of stuff that's just rotted and wasted and not even used. What's driving this is the demand for animals used in traditional Chinese medicine or in bushmeat restaurants. And the prices of some of these things are spectacular. This little box turtle called the golden coin turtle, again, a species endemic to the Annamite Mountains. To put this in context, the average annual cash income for a villager up in the mountains of Laos might be $1,000 or $2,000, because they're not really in a cash economy. But they make a bit of money, like from selling a water buffalo or selling some extra rice or some bamboo shoots in the market. A Lao villager, he finds one of these turtles, he can sell it to a Vietnamese wildlife trader for $30,000 in cash. The turtle's believed to cure cancer in China, among other uses. So you can imagine if the villager sells it to the Vietnamese guy, and then he goes back to Vietnam, sells it to somebody there, who sells it to somebody up in the Chinese border, who sells it across the border. You know, by the time the Chinese billionaire dying of pancreatic cancer in Beijing buys this thing, it might be $100,000 or $200,000. So this demand has the forest full of Laos and Vietnam, and now Indonesia, everywhere, you know, looking for animals used in the wildlife trade. You'll often you read in reports of like United Nations or World Bank about biodiversity conservation in Laos, and kind of a standard line you read for a long time is one of the drivers of biodiversity loss in a country like Laos is poverty. You know, it's like local people need to kill stuff for food. That's BS. The cause of the biodiversity loss is wealth. It's the increasing wealth in China, mainly, and the urban centers of Laos and Vietnam. So I'm not saying China shouldn't be wealthy, but that's just the fact. You now have millionaires and billionaires in China with lots of disposable income, and what they most value are animals used in traditional medicine. So it's a catastrophe right now that has developed in the last 15 to 20 years. Here's the interesting thing. Sawa never occurred in China, as far as we know, so it doesn't appear in the Chinese pharmacopoeia. This is about what a villager can get for a Saola. It doesn't have any value in traditional Chinese medicine. It's just been caught up in the general slaughter of all this snaring. It's basically being wiped out as bycatch. While tragic, I think this also gives us some hope. It's maybe our one window to save this animal from extinction, because unlike rhinos and tigers and elephants, poachers aren't racing us conservationists to find the last Saolas. So hopefully that'll be our little edge and advantage we have to save the animal from extinction. But we have a lot to do. The status of Sawa is very perilous. In 2006, some colleagues and I formed this Sawa working group within the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. We have about 35 members now. This is some of us gathered for our last meeting in Vietnam. We meet face-to-face every 2 years. So our next meeting will be in Laos in May of this year. And what motivates us is love of Sawa, and also recognition that just the importance of Sawa conservation. And there's 4 things I think that make Sawa special, or nearly so. One is its genetic distinctiveness. As I said, there's a lot of unique genes and genetic diversity in the cells of one Sawa. 2 is, as I talked about, its incredibly high degree of endangerment, probably the most endangered large terrestrial mammal in the world, yet comparatively little conservation attention, despite this. And 4, its capacity to act as a conservation umbrella for the Annamite Mountains. So when you do Saola conservation, you're also doing a lot to save all these other endemic rare species in the Annamite Mountains. So looking at this, for those wishing to make an incremental, significant contribution to conservation of the Earth's biodiversity among species, Sawa makes a very, very compelling case for help and for focus. So I don't know how the Annamite Mountains got left on there. I couldn't, when I was playing with this, my slides started out, the background was black. That's why, and I couldn't see extra words that were black, and so I apologize. This is just to remind you how important the Annamite Mountains is. As a spiritual teacher of mine once said, everything is a divination. So I think the Annamite Mountains is just popping up here. So I'm just going to finish up now telling you a little bit about what the Sawa work group is doing to try to save this animal, just in brief. One is raising awareness for Sawa. It's actually an advantage that not a lot of people, like wildlife traders, don't know Sawa, but it's also a constraint. And really starting with the local villagers in its range, because they're the ones that are with the animal every day, they're the ones who can set snares or not snares. And actually working with the villagers is quite rewarding and quite easy. So this is the village headman of this village. And so we're doing stuff like t-shirts. It also involves a lot of drinking in the villages, which is a bit tough for me, even though I'm from Wisconsin. I'm not like a drunken tailgater at Badger games. That's not really my scene. But this is the village headman, Mr. Ah. And I was talking to him about Saola, and we're having a few, they make their own kind of rice whiskey. And he said, "Oh, William," he said, "you're from America, right?" And America's just a word to him, He said, "There must be a lot of Saolas in America, because you have a lot of everything else." I said, "No, there aren't any Saolas in America." He said, "Well, I heard about this country called Africa once, where there's just wild animals running all over the place. There must be lots of Saolas in Africa." And I said, "No, there aren't any in Africa." He said, "There aren't even any next door in Cambodia or China or Thailand. or even the other provinces of Laos. The only place in the world this animal occurs are in those forests outside in the back of your village. You just see the paradigm shift going in his head. He never knew this. He just thought it was, like the wild pigs, and these things are found all over the world. And for these villagers, this is significant because, unfortunately, the United Nations ranks Laos as one of the world's LDC countries, least developed countries. And that's what it's known as in all these reports by the World Bank, a least developed country. That's very arbitrary. You could have called it one of the world's most biodiverse countries, one of the world's most culturally diverse countries, one of the world's most culturally intact countries. But no, they've gotten in this least developed country status, the Lao find very shaming. They hate it. So everybody's sort of looking down on Laos a bit. And then, of course, the villagers, the hillbillies up in the mountains, they're looked down by the urban elites. So for years, well-meaning people from the Lao government and from World Bank projects have been coming to these villages and basically bringing a message of lack. You're poor because you're not in the cash economy. They got a forest full of non-timber resources they get for free that other people have to buy. But no, they're poor because they don't have cash. And you don't have a lot of stuff like people down in cities like Bangkok, and we have to help you get that stuff through development projects. We come and say, you have something the rest of the world doesn't, and the rest of the world is really interested in. They've almost never heard that except from a wildlife trader. And it's very easy then to engage villagers in conservation. They become proud of having Sawa around their forests. The other thing that we're working on is improved protection in key sites where we think Saola still remains. And we're doing this by a project with the governments of Laos and Vietnam by recruiting our own rangers from the villages, training them, supervising them, paying them a decent salary, and again, rewarding them for collecting snares. And this has been quite a good model. We focused on 5 sites in Laos and Vietnam with our partners WWF and the Wildlife Conservation Society. And since 2011, these ranger teams have removed 200,000 snares from the forest. And this is about 199,000 more than had been removed probably in the previous years to this project. And when you remove 200,000 snares from this forest, you just don't benefit Saola. This is one of the globally endangered Duke langurs, and they're mostly up in the trees, but they do come down to the ground. We're learning quite a lot from camera trapping. So he's hung by his hind leg by a snare here, and this is the ranger team in Vietnam. He's just sitting there very calm like a Saola. I don't know, maybe he's been hanging around Saola, but he's not trying to bite anybody or anything. And they're just taking the snare off his hind leg and letting him go. Well, what we've realized is 2 things. Although the protection has gotten better, there's still snares out in the forest. Where the team started collecting, they started out finding, say, 3,000 snares in a month on one of their patrols. Now they're down to finding 600 or 700. But with an animal that's very Saola, 600 or 700 is 600 or 700 too many. There is no site in Laos or Vietnam where Saola is still secure from poaching. And it's going to take a while to get that threat down to 0. The other thing is, if we take the precautionary principle, it's quite possible that if I could wave this magic pointer and eliminate all poaching in Laos and Vietnam overnight, there's a high risk that every remaining subpopulation of Saola would still drift to extinction, because this thing called small population effects kicks in, where like males and females they're so rare, they've had trouble finding each other for breeding. You get genetic inbreeding depression and things like that. So when you come to that conclusion, the only answer is you have to start a captive breeding program for the species. So we've been cooperating with zoos around the world to figure out how to do this. The European Association of Zoos and Aquaria, IAZA, they helped us write this captive breeding plan for Sawa. And we've gotten a lot of good support from the governments of Laos and Vietnam. They've agreed to do this with the technical support of the Sawa working group. In fact, we've been allocated about 60 hectares in Buckman National Park in the Annamite Mountains, and this is where the world's first Saola conservation breeding center is now under development. It will also be a conservation breeding center for that very rare muntjac that you saw in the snare, the large antlered muntjac, because there aren't any in captivity of that species, and that's also in sort of a free fall decline from all the snaring. So these are various members of the Saola working group with our colleagues from the government of Vietnam and the park doing a site visit and assessment of where the center will be in 2017. But first we have to find some Saolas. So talk about your challenges. We're going to start a captive breeding program for an animal no biologist has yet seen in the wild. So what we're doing now is what we're engaged in now is a very intensive detection effort. We have approximately 400 camera traps out now in Laos and Vietnam that have just been getting set in the last 6 to 12 months. And we have a fantastic team of young Lao biologists leading the camera trapping in Laos. This is, that's Mr. Ham Noi, that's Mr. Lei, and that's Mr. Dalvi. And they're working with, this is actually a village militia, and the village guys are working with, and 2 government officials, apparently celebrating somebody's birthday. So we're doing camera trapping, we're doing collecting stream water, using methods to search for Saola DNA in stream water. And we're also going out with the villagers collecting what might be Saola dung, and then we'll do a DNA test to confirm that it's Saola. The challenge we have for surveying for Saola is we can't confidently tell its tracks and its dung from other ungulates. There's a lot of other deer and other things in the Annamite Mountains. You know, if there are tigers in an area or elephants or bears, you'll see their signs. I mean, you can't miss the presence of a tiger, an elephant, or bear. You can miss the presence of a Saola just because their tracks are quite similar to some other species. So we have to go other methods to confirm their presence. So the first thing to do is find the Saolas, and then what we will do is we will work with our projects to really focus protection around the areas where we have confirmed sightings of Saola, just to keep the last ones alive, and then eventually send in the capture teams once the captive breeding center is ready to go. And I want to talk about an animal that's sort of sent a long shadow possibly over Saola conservation. This is the Vaquita. This is the small porpoise that lives in the area of the Sea of Cortez in the Baja California. Do most of you know, have you heard about the story of the Vaquita? So the Vaquita is the world's rarest cetacean. What's the count now? Maybe a dozen? Yeah. So one advantage of the Vaquita is the same situation of Sawa. There's a fish called the totoaba that it has its like air bladder is valued in Chinese medicine. So there's huge netting going on in the Sea of Cortez for this fish. And that's the only place where this beautiful little, it's the world's smallest porpoise is found. And it's been getting caught up in this illegal fishing in the nets. 2 years ago they did a count and they estimated there were only 30 left. So the world got together, they organized millions of dollars, and they said we have to start a captive breeding program. The first one they caught was a young one that didn't seem to be taking, seemed distressed out, so they let it go. Then they caught an adult and it died within like an hour. They actually tried to release it and it died. And they shut down the captive breeding program. I mean, I'm not closely involved, but I think that's a mistake, because now it is going to go extinct. Stopping the captive breeding program because of the risk. As people often ask me, well, isn't trying to catch the last Saolas, isn't that going to be a risk? I say, yeah, of course it is. But we don't have a risk-free option to try to save Saola. The risk of not acting, in our estimation, is now greater. So the head of the Association of Zoos and Aquaria, Dan Ash, a couple of months ago, he published this very poignant editorial called The Immeasurable Distance Between Late and Too Late, learning from the Vaquita example. And can everybody read that? I'll just leave that up for you to read. I'll read it out loud in case some of you can't read it. We must stand united. The distance between late and too late is immeasurable, but we continue to act as if we can measure it and determine the precise moment at which ex situ means can be employed. Ex situ meaning captive breeding. The Vaquita experience once again reminds us of the hubris of that position. We will lose the Vaquita because we are too timid, too divided, and too vested in solving the root problems to bother with stopping to save the species itself. Hopefully this time we have learned. And my hope is that we have learned this lesson in time for the Saola. And what's amazing is there is no Saola in any zoo in the world. And no zoo is going to get a Saola anytime soon. The captive breeding center is going to be in the animal's home country, in its home habitat in Vietnam. Yet zoos of the world have really rallied around the Saola working group and are supporting this effort with technical and financial support. And so you can see these are the donors of the Saola working group, and you can see it's a huge population of zoos from around the world, which I think is just, admirable of the zoos to step forward for an animal that doesn't reflect anything in the collection. This is just fantastic. But we still have a long way to go. We have a lot more money to raise to get this done. Are we 2 minutes before midnight on Saola or 2 minutes after midnight? I can't tell you that standing here. What I do know is we have an opportunity to try. We know there are still some out there. And I just feel grateful that I do live in a time when there are still Saola walking quietly around the forest. That may not be true of biologists 5 years from now. So I no longer think if we're in time or not in time, we just get up and get it done. And I think especially for me as an American and you as an American audience, I think this is a poignant thing to put time and attention to, where once, maybe with the best intentions, we did a lot to destroy, we can now go back to help restore and conserve. And as I said, I'm just grateful for the attempt to try. And the other thing is, Laos is a Buddhist country, and the Buddha said no effort is wasted. And the way I look at it is Saola conservation can't fail. We're doing so much good in just the attempt in conservation of these other species and mentoring these fantastic young wild biologists, that's the other thing that gets me motivated, is that if we just keep trying and doing our best, we're going to do a lot of good in the attempt. So the effort in some ways can't fail. So I'm very grateful for you to coming out on this very, very cold and chilly night. I think what I'll do is I'll stop now for questions. After the questions, if anybody wants to stay, I have, it's like a 9-minute video postcard that I just put together with no narration, of just the sights and sounds of villages in the Annamite Mountains and some things that go on there. And I'm happy to play that after the questions if anybody wants to tour a warm place for 9 minutes, or you can watch some of it and walk out the door. If you want to get involved, there's our email address, there's our website. Also, the Saola Working Group, we send out just a few times a year a Saola update newsletter, just telling people what's going on with the progress of Saola conservation. If you'd like to get on that, I'm going to leave my laptop open. There's a place, just type in your email address and I'll get you added to that list. Thank you very much. Any questions? Anything else you want to know? Yes, sir.
So when Sawa are found, even if they're dead, are they checked for genetic sameness or diversity to give information on whether they're coming from different areas or whether they're concentrated?
Yeah, so the question was, when we find Saola's dead, or we get material, other genetic analysis to study the variation between the species. Yes, we are doing some of that. There isn't a lot of material though. I mean, it's still very rare to find even a dead Saola. And every bit that we get, yeah, we take very good care of it and make maximum use that we can. I mean, Hmong villagers have told me that there's 2 species of Saola. So it gets more complicated. And they actually describe kind of two different forms of Saola, but I'm not even going to go there. If I can find one Saola of any kind, I'll be happy to just, that'll be enough for me. Yes?
I'm intrigued with the idea of captive breeding of an animal that you don't know essentially nothing about.
Yeah.
Do you have any model to work with in figuring this out? I'm thinking from, the rescue of the California condor. They bred other condors first.
Yeah.
How would you approach that problem?
Yeah, so this was not being a zoo hoofstock guy, that's why the Saola work group, we resisted it for a long time. We were determined to save Saola in nature. And we finally realized it's like, yeah, we're bailing a lot of the snares out of the forest, but we're bailing the Titanic. The ship's still going down, and I don't care how many buckets, the ship's still going down. So at some point, you got to get in the lifeboat. Even if getting in the lifeboat is risky, well, you got to do it. So that's why we've engaged. We added now so the Saola work group just started out, we were all field biologists. Now about 10 of our members are experts in the captive breeding of rare hoofed stock. And that's what I asked them about this, and they said, look, we've figured this out for every exotic hoofed animal in the world, and we can figure it out for Saola. They said, we know it's special and distinctive, but it's not unique. At the end of the day, it's a ruminant, it's an ungulate, we know how to do this. What we have talked to the governments about is to learn from the Vaquita example. We have told them that, look, this is not without risk. The first 1 or 2 Saolas we capture, or 3, or 4, might die, but we have to keep going. The government can't say, oh, we're worried about the bad publicity, we're shutting the project down. That could be the death knell for Saola. So we're trying to learn from the Vaquita example in preparing a whole kind of get out front with the media, because I think that Vaquita died, as far as I can tell, just caught them flat-footed, and they had to react to it. We're going to get prepared. If a Saola dies, we're already talking to the media now to get them prepared for that happening. And as I said, it's risky, but we don't have a risk-free option is where we're at. But we're doing all the due diligence we can. It's the best answer that I have. Yep.
So the pregnant female that died in captivity,
Yeah.
any speculation as to why? Are they terminal distress or something?
So she asked the female that died in the little menagerie if we know why. No, unfortunately, there was no post-mortem done. I think it was something to do with her diet or her gut, because I noticed her last 24 hours of life she started having diarrhea. I think there was a local vet gave her an antibiotic she had like a dog, you could see she had like a dog bite on her arm from the capture, or her shoulder. And some guy said, well, depending on the antibiotic, it's possible it could have killed her gut flora, and then, she couldn't digest and had diarrhea. I don't know. Actually, the WCS's wildlife vet at the time, Billy Carish, he flew out from New York. We scrambled Billy Carish, and he examined her, and for a day, and said, oh, yeah, she's a little bit thin, but she looks fine to me. And he gave some general chunks of advice on caring her for her. And he flew back to New York, and she died within 48 hours. And he was completely shocked. He said, he called me heartbroken. He said, what happened? She seemed fine to me. But about a day after he left, she started having diarrhea. He wasn't the one who gave her the antibiotic. It was somebody else. So we don't know. I mean, we know about 8 Saolas that have been in captivity. The longest one that lived was a calf. It was kept in a botanical garden in Hanoi in like 1994. It lived for about 3-4 months. But then again, none of these animals ever been kept with professional care. I mean, if you had the hoofstock keepers and vets at the Minnesota Zoo taking care of these animals, a lot of them might have survived. They just have been kept by Department of Forestry staff and blah. They've never been kept with professional care. Yes?
Are you finding that the Saolas move very much? Are they roamers, or are they pretty stationary? When people find them, do they stay in one spot generally?
So she asked, do we know if Saola, are they roaming? Do they move around? We have no idea. We've talked about catching one and putting a radio collar on it. but that's a debate. If we actually catch one, we should probably take it into captivity. The villagers have told us they make seasonal movements. Laos does have season, like right now it's very cold in the Annamite Mountains. It's a bit north of the equator, so their coldest time of year is the same time as our winter. And it can be, you know, it can be, I've been in like 40 degrees and rain, misting rain and wind up there. It's just horrible. And then they get a very warm season in the summer. And villagers say they do make sort of altitudinal movements, but we know very little about that. Yes?
So I know that you said that the Annamite Mountains are very unique geographically. Is there anywhere else you can look for Sawa in the area besides that mountain?
So she said, yeah, I said that the Annamite Mountains are very unique, and have we looked for Saola in other places? And yes, we have. And what's helpful about Saola, it's so distinctive that you really can't mistake it for anything else. It's very easy to go into villagers, show them a picture of Saola and say, do you know this animal? And they either say yes, or outside of those green areas that I showed you, you show it to a villager and they have no idea. I mean, they will guess. They say, oh, there's a wild goat. And they say, oh, is that the wild goat? And I said, no. So it's, with the village interview information, because it's so distinctive, you can tell quite precisely where it is and where it isn't just by talking to villagers. You know, if a villager is going in the forest every day, 60 years old, has never seen it, and never seen another one that somebody else killed, you can be pretty confident that it's not there. Then that whole range map, and we have figured out that along the border right there, there's this microclimate where when the rest of Laos is completely in its dry season, where it doesn't rain at all, I mean, you don't get a drop of rain for 4 or 5 months, you're getting a little bit of rain up in the Annamite Mountains in every month of the year. We call that ever-wet forest, and most of these endemic species seem to be endemic to that wet forest right along the border. Anything else? So I'll leave the sign up and I'll play the postcard from Laos. As I said, it's about 9 minutes long. Enjoy the warmth and whatever else is on here. Gibbons. That's the gibbon call. One of our survey teams. This is all in the Saolas range. That's a boat made from an external fuel drop tank of the U.S. jet in the war. catching fish by hands under the rocks in this big pool. And that was our lunch on the trail. That's a wild ginger that we made fish soup with. Felt like the boundary waters, you know, shoreline. That's the same house where I was drinking the rice whiskey from that photo. Oh, speaking of. These cotton strings tied on the wrist, which I still have one, is wishing you good luck, the recipient. White hornbill. You've heard of Thai massage, that's Lao massage. These are fan palms for a new roof where the man's collected. Tobacco. Knitting a fishing net. He's going to make a basket. He's preparing the bamboo strips to weave it into a basket. Or no, he actually makes these bird cages. Beeswax candles they're making. Yeah, more in Indonesia. Yeah, no. He's saying, oh, I'm very poor. I don't have a nice house. My life is like this, no money. He makes these traditional musical instruments and sells them. That's what he does for his income. recognize when you don't have electricity, you have to make your own music. You just... This is a game played in villages on festivals. You have to try to jump between these rice pulling sticks. They're attracting cicadas. With the light and the tapping, they're attracting cicadas to the candle, which they're going to catch and then fry. Dehusking sticky rice. There's a lot of music and rhythm in these villages if you just listen for it.
Thank you all for coming. Be careful driving home. It was icy coming here. I'm sure it's going to be the same going back. Be safe.
Put a little sign up down here in the front. Thank you all very much for coming out on this open day. Yes, you can go to